Computer Science A, Unit 4, Iteration, Lesson 3, For Loops. The objective of this lesson is for you to learn the syntax of a for loop in Java and to write code which uses for loops to repeat commands. The for loop is appropriate when you know the exact number of looping iterations before the loop begins. The for loop header does a lot of work, so it is split into 3 components. The first component is the initialization. This is run only once for the loop, when it first starts. Then there's the condition. That is the second thing that runs. After the condition, all the statements within the for loop repeat or run. Once those statements run through, it comes back up and it updates some variable that was initialized and checks the condition again. So it goes initialization, condition, statements, update, condition, statements, update, until the condition is false, in which case it leaves the loop. Here's an example. For int I is equal to 10. Here is your initialization. I greater than 0. This is your condition. Since 10 is greater than 0, it will execute the statement system.out.print I with a space. So it's going to output 10 and a space. Then it's ended the loop, so you're going to come up and decrement. You're going to go from 10 to 9. 9 is still greater than 0, so you're going to execute the system.out.print statement again, and so forth, until you get down to 0. When I is 0, this print statement will not execute. It will leave the loop, and you will have liftoff added to the end of the line, and then a line feed. So here you have initialization, condition, statement, and then here is the update. Typically, it's an increment or decrement. Now, read the program below and compare the code with the output. Think about how the new code affects how the program runs. Look for what the problems are. Okay? This first one over here, we have a count up. I is a variable. I is set to 1, and you could initialize it and declare it both in the for loop, or you could initialize it out or declare it outside of. I is less than or equal to 4, and you're going to increment I by 1, and you're going to output I with a comma after it. Then you're going to have a print line with the I. So here you're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, and when you come outside the loop, I is going to print. Now, what you have to understand is I is declared out here. So the scope of the variable I includes the entire program. I exists in the loop as well as outside the loop. It must be declared here in order to be used here. If you did int I, you would only be able to use I within the loop. That's what happened over here. We had a countdown, and int num is set to 10, did the whole countdown, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, and then jumped out and tried to print out num. But num only exists in this little area. Once you leave that loop, outside the loop doesn't know about num. You need to be careful where variables are declared. While you can declare a variable within the initialization of a for loop, if you're going to use that variable outside of the for loop, then you must declare it outside of the for loop. Now, try this. Create a loop, a for loop, that will calculate the factorial for the number 10. And in case you don't know what 10 factorial is equal to, that's equal to 10 times 9 times 8, and so on until you do times 1. Go ahead and write the for loop. Pause the video. Okay, did you write it? does it look something like this? Int factorial is set to 1. Int I is set to 1. As long as I is less than or equal to 10, you're going to increment it. So factorial is 1, 1 times 1, and all this did was it counted from 1 to 10. Could you go the other way and go 10 down to 1? Sure. This short little loop is an example of a loop that could be put on a test or a quiz, the AP exam, and there are half a dozen different ways to write this. If you're wondering if yours would work, try it or let me see it, and I'll be happy to look it over and check it for you. Now, out of bounds error. We've got a string, hey. Over here, it's at 0, 1, and 2. It's got a length of 3, but the indices into the string are 0, 1, and 2. So for int I set to 0, I less than or equal to 3, I plus plus, you're going to output string dot substring I plus 1. Well, the problem is when I is 3, there's no index 3 in hey, so you're going to get an index out of bounds. We get this error because the string doesn't have an element at index 3, and the loop above didn't stop after 2. This is one example of what we call an off by 1 error, an OBOB, off by 1 bug, OBOB, where we get the bounds on our loop wrong and end up looping one too many, or sometimes one too few times. And again, an OBOB just means instead of using the word error, you use the word bug. So off by 1 bug, OBOB. Now, to mitigate this, we can use the string's length directly, so we always have the right number. So we start at 0 because a string's indexing starts at 0, and we keep I less than the string length, because remember that the last index is 1 less than the string length. Always use I less than string length if you want to get to the end of the string. Use this, not equals. Now, it's worth noting that anything we can do with a for loop, we can also do with a while loop, as a for loop is really just a specialized version of a while loop with a simplified syntax. For example, here's a code segment. I is set to 0, while I is less than string length. We're going to do system.out.println string.substring I plus 1, basically printing out each character, and then incrementing I. We can take 1, 2, 3, 4 source lines of code, also called slock. We can take 4 slock and take it down to 2. We can cut the number of lines of code that we're entering down to 2. Now we still have all the same information. Notice, int I is 0, here's int I is 0. I less than string.length, here's that. Replace the word while with 4. And then you've got I plus plus, which is right here. We combine the initialization, the condition, and the update all into a single line, because we know how many times we're going to loop it. As long as a string is, that's how many times we're looping. And then the only thing we're doing is outputting this substring. These two are equivalent. Now, pause the video, and as an exercise, try writing the while loop as a for loop at the top there, and in the second case, take the for loop and write it as a while loop. Pause the video. Did you do it? All right, let's check it out. Here, we've got our initialization, int I is 1. Our condition, I less than 10. Then here is our system.out.println, and our I plus equals 2. Notice I don't need the curly braces because there is a single statement within the loop. You could put curly braces in if you like. What about taking your for loop and writing it as a while loop? Remember, it's going to expand. Sum is set to 0. Within the loop, we initialize y equal to 3. So there's y equal to 3. While y is greater than -4, there's our condition. What are we going to do? We're going to do sum plus equals y, and then we're going to decrement y. You have to put the update to y at the end of the while loop to make it the same as the for loop. All right, that concludes lesson 3. Well done.